All right, welcome back. I hope you had a fantastic weekend. Today we are going to continue our exam series where I'm going through 10 more questions today from the RBT exam, and I am reviewing how I think you should think about the questions when you're taking your exam from the perspective of a BCBA. So I hope it helps. If you are enjoying these videos, please like and subscribe. That really helps me, that supports me, so I can keep putting out this content for you. If you need study materials, check out our website, rbtexamreview.com, or one of these links, which I will put in the comments and descriptions below, so you can go directly to them. We offer 2 practice exams, the RBT Exam Task List Study Guide. Our combo pack comes with everything, the exam, study guides, and flashcards. It's a great value. Or we have our competency study guide for both the initial and the renewal. So keep studying hard. We had a lot of people pass last weekend, which is really exciting. I always love that. If you have any questions, always email me or leave a comment below. I'm happy to help. Anything you need, please let me know. Other than that, keep watching and let's get into our exam. Okay, so we are starting with question 71 today. After 3 months of teaching, your client is finally able to tell you their name and their address. You are really excited and want to show their parents. When the client's mom asks, "What is your address?" your client is unable to answer. This is a failure to what? Okay, so pretty common scenario where you teach a skill, okay, you get really excited because you've succeeded in teaching your client a skill, you know they can do it, and then when they're asked to do it in front of somebody else or in a different environment, they all of a sudden cannot. So what is that? What is that a failure to do? So is it shape, maintain, prompt, or generalize? Well, if you know your definitions and you know your terms, I always say that's the most important thing. You can immediately eliminate shape and prompt, right? Because shaping has nothing to do with this scenario, okay? Shaping is approximations, and prompting has nothing to do with this scenario, okay? There's no prompts involved, there's no shaping involved. So what are we looking at? We're looking at maintain or generalize. And technically, maintenance is a form of generalization, or at least it's lumped under the generalization category, okay? But they are 2 distinct different things, right? And sometimes they can appear the same, okay? But there's a big difference, okay? Maintenance occurs after teaching has stopped. So if you're done teaching a skill, okay, and you go back a month later and you try to see if they can do that skill, that's maintenance. Generalization, okay, is when they're performing the skill out of the untrained environment, right? So what's happening in this scenario? Well, you're the person who taught them the skill, okay? And now what do they need to do? They need to perform it in front of somebody else in an untrained environment, okay? And they can't do it. Therefore, this is a failure to generalize. So again, maintenance has the skill persisted, okay, without teaching and instruction. Generalization is performing that skill in an untrained environment or with untrained people, untrained things. Okay. In this case, the client was not able to generalize to their mom, right? So as RBTs and BCBAs, we have to correct this because generalization is ultimately our goal. Okay. If we're not generalizing, okay, we're not doing our job. So the answer is D. 72. Which of the following is the best example of interresponse time? So this is a definition question in the form of an application question. What I mean by that is they're really just asking you, do you know the definition of interresponse time? Because if you do in these type of questions, whenever they ask you, what's the best example of duration, what's the best example of frequency, there's only going to be one example in the answer choices, right? So if you know the definition of interresponse time, this is a very easy question, right? Because you're only going to find the one answer that fits because there's only one answer that fits. So what is interresponse time? Okay, interresponse time is the time in between 2 responses, right? So from response A to response B to response C, that is our interresponse time. So we're looking for something, okay, where we have 2 separate responses and time in between it. So A, flights were too expensive, so you decided you would drive to the beach instead. The trip took 4 hours there and 5 hours back. So what are we measuring here? We're measuring the length of the trip, okay? But we have no idea how long in between drives, right? We just know how long the drives took. And that's measuring what? That's measuring duration. Okay, so A is out. B, you got to the party at 8 p.m., but you didn't start to greet your friends until 8:10 p.m. Okay, do we have two responses here? Do we have time between two responses? No, we just have you get into the party and 10 minutes later you start to greet your friends. So if anything, this would be latency. So B is out. C, you're mailing out wedding invitations. You have to lick and seal 300 envelopes. You usually take a 10-second break in between sealing one and licking another. Okay, so what are we doing here? We're measuring the time in between sealing one envelope and licking another, right? So in between, okay, licking and sealing envelopes, same response, okay? 10 seconds in between envelopes, right? That describes interresponse time pretty well, right? We have envelope A, okay, we seal it, and then we lick envelope B, right? So time in between A and B is 10 seconds, right? And then B and C, another 10 seconds, C and D, another 10 seconds, okay? So we have two responses, time in between, that describes interresponse time. C looks good. Always read all your answer choices just to be sure because we're looking for the best example, okay? D, you're measuring on-task behavior. If your client stays on task the entire time, you mark it as correct, okay? What type of recording is this most likely? Well, if we're looking at task the entire time, this could be whole interval, okay? It's hard to say, but either way, we're not measuring two responses, okay? So our best answer here is C. So, okay, things like duration and frequency, okay, and rate, we're looking at one response. When we're looking at interresponse time, we're looking at two responses, right? Because we need the time in between. So that's kind of a little hint, okay? So when you're looking at these questions, if we're looking for interresponse time, find the answer choices with two responses, okay, and find time in between. So best answer here is C. 73, which of the following best represents least to most prompting? All right, least to most and most to least prompting involve the prompt hierarchy, right? So we go up and down our prompt hierarchy, right? We go from full physical to partial physical to modeling, etc. And these can be a little tricky, okay, because there are different ideas on the correct order of the hierarchy, okay? Some people have visual as the least amount of prompting. Some people have verbal as the least amount of prompting, okay? And really it's client specific when we're doing least to most and most to least, okay? So really what you need to understand, all right, for least to most and most to least in the prompt hierarchy is that our full physical and our partial physical is always going to be at the top of that hierarchy. That is always going to be the most intrusive prompting, okay? And then always our least, okay, are going to be our visuals and our verbals, okay? And then modeling is going to fall somewhere in between. And that's what you need to remember, okay? Because depending on where you look, the hierarchy could look different, okay? So again, most prompting is physical, least is going to be our verbals, right? And our visuals and our gesturals, okay? And then modeling is going to fall somewhere in between, okay? So for least to most prompting, right? We're starting with the least intrusive prompt and moving up to the most intrusive, okay? So A, partial physical, full physical, verbal prompt. Well, we know this is out, okay? Because this would, we're going from a physical prompt to a verbal prompt. That is not least to most, okay? That would be a most to least. So A is out. B, modeling, gestural, verbal. Again, modeling is always going to come after the gesturals and the verbals and before partial and full physicals, okay? So this would not represent least to most, right? That would be, if anything, most to least again. C, visual, modeling, verbal, okay? These are out of order, right? Modeling, if modeling was coming after verbal in this situation, then we could argue this is least to most, but it isn't, so C is out. So that leaves us with D, verbal, gestural, modeling, okay? We're going least amount of intrusive prompt with our verbal, okay? Slightly more with gestural, and then slightly more with modeling. Least to most, the best answer here is D. So keep that in mind when doing least to most prompting and most to least prompting, okay? That hierarchy might look a little different depending on where you look online. However, Our most prompts are always going to be physical. Our least will always be the verbals and the gesturals and the visuals, and then modeling is going to fall somewhere in between, okay? But our answer here is D. 74, you are teaching someone how to shoot pool. You start by holding their arms and demonstrating the motion. You then only put your hands on their elbows. You then remove the prompt altogether. What are you implementing? So you could say this is, maybe a most to least, okay? But when we're talking about just physical prompts, okay, and fading physical prompts and only introducing physical prompts as needed, there's a very specific term for that, okay? Is it least to most prompting? We'll know that this is the opposite of least to most given the scenario, right? Because you're going most to least, A is out. Task chaining, okay? Are you teaching a series of steps? No, we don't have a series of steps here, okay? We're teaching the motion, that's about it. It's not task chaining. Delayed prompting, are you giving an SD and then waiting to give the prompt? No, you are immediately giving the prompt, right? You start full physical, okay? So no delay there. So that leaves us with what? D, gradual guidance. So you could always do this, okay? Process of elimination if you don't know gradual guidance. However, it would be easier and you could answer this question much quicker if you just knew what gradual guidance was, okay? And gradual guidance, right, is introducing physical prompts as needed and fading physical prompts as soon as possible, okay? So in this scenario, we're holding arms, full physical, and then putting our hands on their elbows, partial physical, and then fading the prompts, okay? So when we're talking about introducing and removing physical prompts, okay, we're talking about gradual guidance, right? As needed, we introduce, okay, a little more physical prompts as needed, right? And fade as quickly as possible, okay? 75, continuous reinforcement is also known as blank. So this is an easy question, but the answer choices are tricky, okay? So immediately, A should jump out as you as the right answer, okay? You should know that continuous reinforcement is FR1, right? Every response is reinforced on a continuous schedule, okay? That is the definition of continuous reinforcement. So that should automatically jump out at you. This should be a very simple question that you answer very quickly. However, if you're listening to my advice, you should be reading all the answer choices, okay? So B, the best way to maintain a behavior, right? No, the best way to teach a behavior is continuous reinforcement. Maintain, right, as intermittent reinforcement. A FI1 schedule, a fixed interval 1 schedule, that's not continuous reinforcement because remember, that's reinforcement every minute. That behavior could happen 100 times within the minute, but you're only going to reinforce after a minute, okay? So that's not continuous reinforcement. And then the tricky one is the opposite of intermittent reinforcement. So I don't think it's necessarily correct to say intermittent reinforcement is the opposite of continuous reinforcement, right? Because intermittent reinforcement represents all the other reinforcement schedules outside of continuous. FR1 is continuous. All our other reinforcement schedules are intermittent, okay? So the best answer here, right? Continuous reinforcement is also known as an FR1, fixed ratio 1 schedule. Super easy question, but you have to know your definitions. 76, ethics question, okay? When you're speaking with the family, it is important to blank. Okay, so the question doesn't give us a bunch. We just know we're in a scenario where we're talking with the family, okay? That should immediately key you in that this is sort of an ethics question, right? So we should be thinking common sense. We should be thinking a strong answer, but not too strong and not too weak, okay? So let's read our answer choices. When you're speaking with the family, it is important to document every conversation you have with the parents. Not necessarily, it's not realistic, okay? Especially if you work quite a few hours with the family. You're gonna be talking to them a lot, most likely, and documenting every conversation just isn't realistic. So this is an example of a question or answer choice that is just too strong, okay? B, avoid using jargon and technical language. Yeah, this is pretty good, right? When you're talking with the family, you have to remember they're not trained in ABA, right? They're not RBTs, they're not technicians. So you can't use the same language that we use, okay, when talking with each other. As a BCBA, I might speak to you one way and use a bunch of technical language, but when I'm talking with a parent, okay, I'm going to explain it in ways that they can understand. And that is avoiding the use of jargon and technical language as much as possible. So B is pretty good, okay? B is on the money. Let's look at C. Use as much technical AB language as you can. It is important for the family to understand the terms. No, right? Now, parent training is important. So we might teach them the language, okay? And as they learn it, we can incorporate it more, but using it just to sound smart, or using it just to show off how much you know, or using it just because you want the family to, you think the family needs to understand it, is not necessarily the case, okay? They don't have to understand our language. They need to understand what we're doing in ways that make sense to them. That's what the important part is. So C is out. And then in D, avoid speaking to the family as much as possible. Your job is to only implement treatment plans. Well, your job is to implement, right? But your job is also to build rapport with the family, maintain a good relationship with the family, and occasionally have opportunities to work with the family, right? Work with the client. So rapport is important. A relationship is important. You should be professional, right? You should be courteous, and you should be kind, right? So the best answer here is B. Avoid using jargon and technical language when you're speaking with the family. Okay, speak in terms that they can understand when discussing their child, discussing behavior, or discussing anything else we're doing. 77. Your client hates the sound of Baby Shark being played through your phone. Whenever you play Baby Shark, your client hits you. You teach your client to say, please stop playing that song instead of hitting you. Now, when your client says, please stop playing that song, you stop playing the song, but when your client hits you, you continue playing the song. What is this considered? All right, so we have a differential reinforcement question here. We have our DRI, DRO, DRA, DRH. So what is our trick, or what is our rule for differential reinforcement? Well, let's start with DRO, okay? Are we reinforcing the absence of one behavior, okay? Or are we reinforcing a replacement behavior? Well, we're reinforcing please stop playing that song and putting client hitting you on extinction. So we're reinforcing a replacement behavior, right? That therefore it can't be DRO. Remember, DRO, we're not reinforcing replacement behaviors, okay? So DRO is gone. So it has to be what? DRI or DRA. So your next question is, can that replacement behavior occur at the same time as the behavior we're getting rid of? Are they incompatible, or are they just alternative? Well, can your client say, please stop playing that song and hit you at the same time? Yes, that is completely possible, right? So these behaviors aren't incompatible, okay? We're just teaching an alternative. Therefore, the answer has to be what? DRA. If you think about differential reinforcement questions like that, super easy. Start with DRO. Are we reinforcing in the absence of a behavior? Okay. Is there no replacement behavior being taught? Then it's probably DRO. Then you go to, is there a replacement behavior being taught? If so, is it incompatible with the behavior getting rid of? If it's incompatible, it's DRI. If it's not incompatible, it's DRA. Okay. So keep that in mind when doing differential reinforcement questions. These oftentimes give people difficulties, okay, because they're very application heavy, right? There's usually a lot going on in the question, right? But they don't need to be complex, okay? Study this stuff in a way that you're going to remember when taking your exam. All right, so 77 is DRA. Our alternative behavior is the functional communication of please stop playing that song. Our behavior we're putting on extinction is client hitting us. 78, what is the ultimate goal of reinforcement? Okay, so there's one main thing, okay, we're trying to achieve with a reinforcement. Is it a self-management plan? Is that the client will receive reinforcement from the natural environment? Is it a fade to a VR schedule, or is it a behavior contract? Well, it's not a behavior contract, okay? Behavior contract is a good way to maintain and generalize behavior, okay, and start accessing other reinforcement. But behavior contracts aren't the ultimate goal because they're not always necessary. Same as a self-management plan. Self-management is great. It's a great tool to have, okay, but it's not the ultimate goal, right? It's a tool, but it's not what we're trying to necessarily achieve. And then fading to a VR schedule. yeah, fading the reinforcement is a goal of reinforcement, right? Because we can't stay continuous forever, okay? But VR might not be the best schedule for our client. We might use a VI or FI or another schedule, right? So it's not necessarily the goal. That leaves us with B. The client will receive reinforcement from the natural environment, okay? What does that mean? That means that we don't have to, so for the skill we're teaching, the client will contact natural reinforcement in the environment without it being contrived, okay? Because our behavior, remember, is maintained and increased by contacting reinforcement, okay? But reinforcement is not always contrived, right? We can't always set it up. So for us, we have to contact reinforcement in the natural environment, okay, to continue some of these behaviors and these responses, okay? So the ultimate goal of reinforcement is where we can fade, token boards and contracts and all this contrived reinforcement and just get it to the point where the client is out in the world in their natural environment and their behavior is being maintained through natural means. That is the ultimate goal of reinforcement. 79, a consequence intervention is also known as a blank strategy. So we're looking at a consequence intervention. So when you see consequence, you should be your brain should start operating, right? You should think consequences or reinforcement. We're thinking punishment. Okay, we're thinking reactive, right? We're reacting to a behavior. So all these things you should be, when you read the question choice or the question, okay, try to start answering it before you get to the answer choices. Okay, and if you can answer the question before you get to the answer choices, then you're really starting to get to stuff, and the test is going to be so easy. So try it here. Consequence intervention is also known as a what strategy? Well, we have reinforcement, we have punishment, we have reactive, so we're looking for one of those kind of in that ballpark. Okay, so we have a consequence intervention is also known as a punishment strategy. Well, that was one of our choices. Okay, what's the problem with that, right? It can also be a reinforcement strategy, right? So we don't necessarily refer to a consequence intervention, okay, as a punishment strategy, right? Because that's just a piece of the consequence, okay? And there's a much better answer here. So this is a good example of reading all the answer choices, okay? Because punishment looks like an okay answer choice, but there's a much better one, right? And the better answer choice is reactive, okay? Reactive sums up and describes a consequence intervention much better than a punishment strategy, okay? Because if we're going to describe a consequence intervention as a punishment strategy, that implies that our consequences are only punishment. But remember, we can have reinforcement, we can have extinction, we can have punishment, right? There's a variety of consequences we can implement, but what is a consequence intervention always? It's always reactive, okay? So this is a tricky question, and it's a good example of why you need to read all your answer choices. Because if you read this, and even if you study and know your stuff, okay, you might want to pick A immediately and say, oh, it's a punishment strategy, and move on. But you're missing the best answer, okay? You gave an okay answer, but you're missing the best answer. And they're going to give you questions like this on the test where they might give you an answer that's decent, okay, or looks okay, but you're missing the best answer choice, which is reactive, okay? So again, always read your answer choices, okay? Make sure you get the best answer you can find from the 4 choices, okay? And a consequence intervention is reactive, okay? Or reacting to the behavior. Finally, question 80, your partner makes the same terrible joke every time you bring home Starbucks. In the past, you laugh only to be nice and the jokes continued. Today, you decided you weren't going to laugh or respond anymore. What are you implementing? So think dad jokes, right? Your partner makes a bunch of dad jokes and you wanted to be nice and friendly, so you laughed and the jokes just kept coming and coming. And today you said, no more, right? I'm no longer laughing at their jokes. I'm tired of their jokes. What are you implementing? Is it negative punishment, extinction, positive punishment, or extinction burst? Well, what are we doing here? What are we doing in this scenario, right? Are we adding or taking anything away, okay, in order to decrease the behavior, okay? Or are we just ceasing to deliver reinforcement? And that's what you have to ask yourself, okay, in this scenario, right? because a lot of people in this scenario might say negative punishment, right? Well, no, we're taking away our laugh. Well, if we're not laughing, okay, you don't laugh, you can't take away the laugh if the laugh isn't there, right? For negative punishment, you have to be able to take something away. Okay. So that would be like if they brought home Starbucks, they made a joke, and you took their Starbucks away as a form of punishment. That's negative punishment. Okay. In this scenario, we're not taking anything away. Okay. We're just not giving reinforcement, right? So what does that mean? If we're ceasing to deliver reinforcement for a previously reinforced behavior, what is that? That is extinction. And that's an important concept, right? Extinction is not punishment. Extinction is just not giving reinforcement, right? Punishment is punishment. And for it to be punishment, we have to be able to add something. So that would be like they bring home Starbucks, they make a joke, and you say something mean to them, right? As a form of punishment, you're adding something. Or again, if you took away their Starbucks in response, that's punishment, which is negative punishment, okay? But we're not doing that, right? We're just not giving reinforcement. And when you stop reinforcement for a previously reinforced behavior, that is extinction. So that is 10 more questions. Those were difficult questions, okay? So I hope you understand those. And if you're getting those right, then you're doing super, super job, right? You're well on your way, okay? If you're not getting those right, go back, review your terms, review your definitions, okay? Get more fluent, and those will become easier, right? Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. As always, if you need study materials, check out our website or check out one of these links, which I will put in the comments and descriptions below. Keep studying hard. It's going to pay off. Questions, email me, leave a comment. Happy to help. I will see you back here Wednesday for our question series, and as well as Friday, where we're continuing our task list series. Other than that, have a great week, and I'll see you soon.